All right, let's get right into it. If you're anywhere in the Department of Defense supply chain, you've heard of CMMC. You know it's a big deal. Well, today we are going to zero in on the single most critical piece of the whole puzzle, your assessment scope. Seriously, if you get this right, you're already halfway to success. But if you get it wrong, well, that's exactly what we're here to help you avoid. You know, for so many businesses, just the thought of a mandatory CMMC assessment is enough to cause a headache. It feels incredibly complex, maybe a little overwhelming, and let's be honest, the stakes are super high. But what if I told you the starting point wasn't some mountain of 110 different security controls, but just one single strategic decision? Because it all comes down to this one word: scoping. This isn't just some boring preliminary step you check off a list. No, this is the foundational decision. It's what's going to determine the cost, the complexity, and, yeah, the ultimate outcome of your entire assessment. Your journey doesn't start with controls. It starts with drawing a map. So here's our game plan. We'll start with the scoping challenge itself. Then we'll get practical and talk about drawing your boundary and categorizing all your assets. We'll also dive into the really interesting and kind of controversial trade-off between cost and risk. After that, we'll tackle cloud providers, and finally, we'll map out your first concrete step to success. Okay, first things first. Let's use a little analogy here. I want you to think of your assessment scoop as the map of your fortress. Defining this boundary, deciding exactly where your walls are, is probably the most important strategic decision you're going to make in this whole process. And this right here is exactly why that map matters so much. If you draw your scope too broadly, if you basically say your walls are around the entire kingdom, then you're telling an assessor you have to defend every single computer, every server, every little village to the absolute highest standard, and that becomes impossibly expensive and just way too complex. A smart scope protects what really matters, your sensitive data. So how do we actually draw this all-important boundary? Well, it's a pretty methodical process. It's got to be documented inside and out in your system security plan, your SSP. And this part's crucial, it has to be technically enforced. You can't just wave your hands and say a system is out of scope. You have to prove it's actually separated, either physically or logically. Think of this as your 5-step mission plan. First, you've got to pinpoint everywhere that sensitive data, that's the controlled unclassified information, or CUI, comes into and leaves your network. Step 2, you map its entire journey. Where does it go? Then, once you know that flow, you list out every single component it could possibly touch. From there, you categorize those assets, and finally, you document and diagram the whole shebang. All right, so you've identified all the assets inside your fortress walls. Now what? You can't just treat them all the same. CMMC gives us 4 specific categories to sort them into. And trust me, which category an asset falls into completely changes how it gets assessed. This is where you can be really strategic and save yourself a lot of pain. Now, check this out, because this table really shows you how the workload gets divided up. Your CUI assets, those are the crown jewels. They get hit with the full 110 control assessment. No surprise there. Then you have your security protection assets. Think of these as the guards and walls. They only get assessed against controls that are relevant to what they do. And then you have these last 2 categories, which get a much lighter touch. And that, my friends, is a massive opportunity to slash your assessment costs if you categorize things correctly. Let's really dig into that distinction for a second. It's simple, but it's critical. If a device stores, processes, or transmits CUI, boom, it's a CUI asset. Full stop. It gets assessed against everything. But a security protection asset, or SPA, is different. This is your firewall, your multi-factor authentication tool. It doesn't actually handle the sensitive CUI itself, but it protects the systems that do. It's definitely still in scope, but only for the security functions it performs. And that brings us to this really unique CMMC term, Security Protection Data, or SPD. So what is it? It's the data that's created by your security tools. We're talking log files, vulnerability scan results, firewall configurations, all that good stuff. Where you store this data is so important, because if, for example, your internal ticketing system contains SPD, well, you just accidentally pull that entire system into scope as a security protection asset. You have to be careful. Okay, now we're getting into the really interesting stuff, the gray areas. These are the two categories that cause the most confusion, the most debate out there: contractor risk managed assets and specialized assets. And the reason they exist is because the DoD made a very deliberate compromise between perfect 100% security and the practical realities of running a business. And this question right here, it perfectly captures what everyone is thinking. It's a direct quote from the community, and it's such a valid point. Why on earth would you have assets on the same network as your most sensitive data, but not fully assess them? It kind of feels like leaving a backdoor unlocked in your fortress, right? Well, the answer is just one word: cost. That's it. The DoD looked at the landscape and realized that forcing a small business to secure, say, their entire HR and accounting department to the exact same level as their top secret engineering systems, well, it would just be financially impossible for many of them. So they created these categories to lower the burden. And in doing so, they knowingly accepted a bit of risk. It's a calculated gamble to keep the supply chain open. Specialized assets are the other piece of this compromise. Just think about that one critical piece of machinery on your factory floor that still has to run on Windows XP because a replacement costs $100,000. You literally can't fully secure it. And the DoD gets that. So these assets don't get assessed. But, and this is a big but, they absolutely must be documented in your SSP along with a clear plan for how you're managing the risk they introduce. Now, here's a curveball. Your boundary doesn't just stop at your own four walls. It actually extends out to any external provider that stores, processes, or transmits your CUI, or even just your security protection data. And honestly, this is a spot where a lot of companies get tripped up. So this leads to the million-dollar question we see all the time. Let's say you've got CUI living in a cloud-based ERP system, or maybe you use a cloud service for all your backups. Do those services have to meet that super stringent federal security standard known as FedRAMP? And the answer, as this chart makes crystal clear, is a huge, unambiguous yes. If a cloud service provider handles your CUI, and listen closely here, even if that CUI is encrypted, they absolutely must be FedRAMP authorized or have an equivalent certification. The DoD's position here is rock solid. CUI in the cloud means FedRAMP, period. If the provider only handles your SPD, the bar is a little lower, but they are still in scope. And for every single one of these in-scope providers, whether it's your cloud host or your managed service provider, you are required to have a document called a Customer Responsibility Matrix, or CRM. This is not optional. This document spells out in black and white exactly which security controls are their responsibility and which ones are yours. An assessor will not even start without seeing these. Whew, okay, we have covered a ton of ground. So let's bring it all home. Let's focus on the absolute most important takeaways that are going to put you on the fast track to a successful assessment. If you walk away with anything, make it these 5 points. 1. Scoping is everything. It drives your cost, it drives your complexity. 2. Your boundary isn't just technology. It's people, it's facilities, and your external partners. 3. Document everything. Your SSP is your Bible. 4. The DoD gives you some wiggle room with things like CRMAs to make this whole thing achievable. And 5, the big one for anyone using the cloud, CUI in the cloud requires FedRAMP. That is non-negotiable. And at the end of the day, all of this documentation, all this hard work, it serves one huge purpose. When an assessor opens up your SSP and sees a thoroughly documented, well-thought-out scope, it sends an incredibly powerful message. It tells them, you know your stuff, you've done the work, and you're taking this seriously. It completely sets the tone for the rest of the assessment. So, as we wrap this up, I'm going to leave you with this one thought. An assessment is on the horizon for basically everyone in the defense industrial base. The real question isn't if it's coming, it's are you prepared? Is your fortress map drawn? Is it justified? And is it ready for inspection?